Hello.
Hello.
Morning, morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Professor, I finally did it.
Did you see what I wrote? I'm like,
Yeah.
yay, finally. I did. I totally acknowledged it. I was like, yay, week 13. Better late than never. That's what they say, right, Isaiah?
Right.
All right. 2 more weeks. Mind blowing. I can't believe we're done. Theoretically, 1 more week, like this week, and then next week is your stuff. Amazing. Okay. A few more. We'll wait a couple of minutes we'll wait another minute for a few more because we usually top in our 20s and we're only at 17. Okay. If you can turn on your camera because I want to have a conversation about the web browser lockdown and the project that's due next week. So if you can turn on your camera, I don't care what you look like, it's fine. I just want to be able to see your faces about how many of you guys at least attempted, maybe you were successful, you were unsuccessful with the lockdown web browser test. Who tried it? Amy, I know you did, and you ended up being successful. It looks like Arlene did. I'm pretty sure Claudia, you were doing it, right? Claudia?
Yeah, I did it.
Were you successful?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how or why or what, but the web browser lockdown exam, which was on the schedule, I put it on the schedule for last week. I don't know how to impress upon you how important it is for you to try and do it, because I'm turning to Amy, I'm turning to Claudia, and I'm turning to Arlene to talk about like the frustration when it doesn't work. Okay, so the 3 of you, when it didn't work, but it eventually worked. It took a while though. Amy, how many emails? Claudia, how many emails? Like just speak to it so that it's not just
2 weeks.
me impressing
We worked on it
upon
2 weeks.
Okay, that's why it is so important for you to try it. Claudia, anything you want to add?
Oh, well, it took like almost a whole weekend to try to figure it out. About like 11 emails back and forth.
So this is why, and maybe the whole thing is fixed. I know that I've been feeding Crystal all of your background, and I know she has been working behind it every single day to try and make it easier. So maybe the rest of you will get on tomorrow or today and it'll work perfectly. But I beg you, I don't know how else to impress upon you other than hearing it from your classmates, that you really have got to try and go in and try to take the sample test. Once you are done with downloading all the browsers and you're able to take this sample test, which isn't even a test, what is it, 5 questions, Amy and Claudia? It's like nothing, right?
Yeah, 5 questions.
It's nothing, and it's all about the lockdown browser. It's not about psychology.
Yeah, none about anything with the class thing.
It took 5 seconds.
Professor, I want to add, able to open it once you took it out from the week 15 and you transfer it to module 13. That's when I able to take the quiz. When you took it out from week 15 and put the quiz on 13, that finally worked for me. And I checked the spyware and the internet service and worked after 2 weeks.
Anything though, that's the whole point. All I did was from the background, because I was going crazy for you guys because I felt terrible you couldn't do it. All I was doing was like unpublishing and publishing, trying to move this to that. Like all I was doing was changing things. I can't tell you what I did, but I don't think that I ever took it out of week 15. I think it's still there in week 15, Amy, because I changed the opening date, but I changed the opening date to put it on last week. So I did that 2 weeks ago. I cannot tell you. I know that Crystal from the psych department has been working on it tirelessly. We are not the only ones that had issues. I spent hours, trying to, she even gave us a way to like recreate the quizzes, but they should just make it work, So anyway, I can't stress enough how important it is for you guys to go back to either week 13 or jump ahead to week 15 and try to do the lockdown browser quiz. It is super important because it took a small village to try and get it to work. And I assuming it works now because 3 out of you were able to take it. Did anybody, Arlene, tell me about your experience?
Everything went good with me. The only issue I had was when they said to show your ID, and it kept making me like readjust the card like where it was. But other than that, everything went smoothly, and I tried it last week.
You were able to do it last week?
Yes.
Interesting. When did you finish, Amy, and when did you finish, Claudia?
I started on the week 5th. Remember you said I can start on Saturday, try on the 6th. That's when I started having problem. And then after a week, which is the 12th and 13th, no. I started on Thanksgiving. Let me see the
Huh.
2 weeks before. So it worked on, when did I talk to you? 5 and 6, it worked, but I started on the week before that, right?
Hi. All right. And Claudia, I know you started earlier and you were able to get it done like a few days ago, right? Claudia?
Yeah, it was recently that I got it done.
Okay. All right. So I just want you to hear it from your peers that you have to try it and get it done. I would love feedback from those of you that didn't do it. Like just drop me a note that you got it done and there was no problems, or you got it done and you had problems. Because again, this is your final. And so being that you only have 3 3 days to take your final. We don't have 2 weeks to be contacting me and trying to figure it out and go into the department. It's got to work for you guys, like the day it opens. So when it opens at midnight, 12:01 on Sunday, the 13th, I think. Is that a Sunday, the 13th? When it opens at 12:01 on the 13th, it has to be working for you guys. And so whether it's your computer, and we'll figure that out before lockdown browser, it can't be our system. So we've got to make sure it's not your computer. So that's why it is.
Professor, excuse
Yes.
me, where would you post the quiz, the final exam? It's not on module 15, right?
It
So
is,
you
but
didn't
it
put it-
doesn't, it won't, it's not active till the 13th at 12:01. So it's quote unquote published, but it won't show. So it has a date. So just to get us through, can you believe it? We have, theoretically, this could be our last class, but I will get on next Tuesday if you have any questions about the PowerPoint or whatnot. You know, if you get on, you get on, you don't. So theoretically, this is our last teaching class. And you guys have got to be done. So the 16th is the change date for everything to be done. Originally, I had your PowerPoint and everything due in by the 19th, but I changed that all because they wanted everything in by the 16th with the final. So your PowerPoint presentation has to be in by the 16th as well. So you lost a couple days on that one too, but I opened it weeks ago and I told you to start it around week 10 when you handed in your paper. So I wanted you to be on your mojo for the paper and just jump it into the PowerPoint presentation. Evelyn, I still cannot read your paper. So you've got to figure something else out or you're getting a 0 on the paper. I can't do any more. If I can't read it, I can't grade it.
But I tried to resend the pictures through
I
my
never got 'em.
phone. I don't know. No.
Nope, didn't get it.
Oh,
That's why I'm saying it to you, because if I can't read your paper, I cannot grade you. So far, I cannot read your papers the way, however you're sending them. I didn't get the pictures, but I didn't get.
yeah, but it says like a link, right?
No, I didn't get any email from you.
How come? Because I have the email here that I did send it. To
I
you.
know, but that's why I'm bringing it up.
No,
because-
I know. And then you tell me to open it. Then I did something that said like a permission or something like that.
I'll go back and I'll double check
Oh,
to see.
Give me a headache.
I'll just write a note for myself to go back to Evelyn's original email and see if you somehow unlocked it. I don't know. But as of right now, I haven't read it. So you guys all have your papers. That's what gets transposed into your PowerPoint presentation. So again, week 15 is unlocked for you. Go to week 15 if you haven't already and learn about how to do the PowerPoint presentation and get it in this week so that you do not have it next week. You can just concentrate on the final. Get it done and over with. This week is still another learning week. This week is, we learned all about the diseases last week. I hope that it was interesting for you. Okay, I have a question on the PowerPoint. Go ahead, Arlene.
Yeah, so sorry. I finished
that's fine.
most of the I finished the slides. It's just one specific one I'm having trouble with.
Okay.
It was the 12th slide. I was just confused with the wording on it.
Can you tell me what, I don't know it by heart, what the 12th slide is. Can you tell me what they asked for?
Yeah, it was, I'm just pulling it up right now. So the 12th slide said, so what of articles?
Say that one more time.
It said, so what of articles?
Oh, like why? So what? Like, why is this important?
Oh, okay, I understand. So
Yeah.
you want like, why is it important for the topic number 1 and then another slide for topic number 2? Or just put it all in one?
You can put it all in one. You know, that is a very detailed PowerPoint presentation created by the department. Remember, this giant project is created by the Psych department. No matter what class of intro to Psych, you have to do all parts of it. You have to do the research paper where they bring in the librarian. Now, not everybody brought in the librarian. I thought it would be helpful for you guys to learn from the librarian rather than having to figure it out on your own. But everybody had to do the research worksheet and pick a first article. Then everybody had to pick a second article and write the paper according to the standards that are written in the module. And then this PowerPoint presentation was created, all the how-tos were created by the department. So every one of them has to be exactly alike. So I am fine with you doing the so what's on the same slide. Just for those of you who haven't started it, which I imagine there's a bunch of you, if you didn't do the lockdown browser, there's a bunch of you that didn't do this either. There is a video you watch on it. You take like a little quiz on how to record your project, and then you actually do, it's called the poster presentation on the article. If we were in class, you'd be doing it on a trifold board and be presenting it to the class in 10 minutes. Instead, you're going to put it on a PowerPoint, and you're downloading a software that allows you to do the PowerPoint and speak over it. Now, what's important about the speaking over your PowerPoint is that you're not reading what's on your slide. Your slide should just be a small representation of the information, and what you speak is the information that expands on it. Any one of us can read a PowerPoint presentation, so we don't need to hear your PowerPoint presentation because we can read. So you are creating this PowerPoint that has bullets and it looks visually nice and it has parts of the information, but you're actually telling us a lot of the information by voicing over. So think about it as if you were presenting to the class. You wouldn't put every word of your paper on a trifold board. You'd put little bits of information that were pertinent and you'd be speaking about it for 10 minutes. Does anybody have any more questions about the PowerPoint presentation? It's a big percentage of your grade. So it's super important that you do a good job on it. It's not hard. You really don't have to do any more work than you've done because you've done the research worksheets and you've done the paper. So all you're doing is putting it into a PowerPoint. So it's not a lot of work. We have a tendency to procrastinate because we think it's going to be harder than it is. That's a natural personality trait. Get it done and over with. If you had done it in week 10, when I told you, when you were on your roll with all your information, it would have taken you no time at all. Now it's 5 weeks later, and it's going to take you a little bit more time because you have to rethink, you have to relearn the information in your paper. Get it done, get it over with. Remember, your final is cumulative, which means all 14 chapters of information. So you can go back and look at the chapters to study for your final. I would suggest doing the like self-tests in the chapter so that you can, you know, inside the chapter, after every little part, they have those little like self-checks of the information. Go back and self-check. And if you don't remember something, just review it. It's cumulative. It's 50 questions for a total of 100 points. It's only 10% of your grade. That's very small. 10% of your grade. So don't freak out about it. It's only 10%. This project in total is 35%. So you've really got to make sure you do a great job on the PowerPoint. But you're studying all 14 chapters again. The best way for you to study, hopefully, is that you took notes and you have a notebook that you can study. I mean, that's really the best way to study for this, being cumulative. So any questions now about the final?
Professor,
Yes.
yeah, it said that it's 60 minutes, the limit, right? For
60
the,
minutes is the limit, and once you open it, it locks after 60 minutes. So that's why I said, remember last week I said, don't, you know, go to the bathroom before your thing, you know, don't have a delivery scheduled in that 1 hour that you take it. You get to pick the hour.
I know, but you know, like for me to reading, I almost, you know, like for the another old quiz, I take more than what I'm supposed to because
So
I always,
that's an accommodation that you have to work out with your counselor.
no, but they give me the accommodation. I always, for my test, I always have the time and a half. But it's supposed to be in the letter because I always with Professor
Okay,
Jeremy.
first of all, I don't think I ever got your letter. Okay, so
Mm.
that's the starter, is that I don't think I got your letter. The second is that I will have to contact the department because I
Jason.
don't know how to make your test an hour and a half. I get a blueprint from the department and the department made it an hour long. So we've got to contact the department. I'll write a letter and copy you
Jason.
on it. Okay, so you have time and a half?
Yeah.
Okay, Evelyn, I don't think I ever got your accommodation.
I
but it
remember that
doesn't
he
matter.
told me that he sent it to you. I remember Jason. No?
I will look. Jason contacted me about the paper, but I don't think I ever got your accommodations, but I will look. So you get time and a half. Is there anybody else in this class that has accommodations that I should know about, that I should let the department know? Because I'll have to find out how to make this 1.5 hours. Anyone? Okay. All right, Evelyn, just stay tuned. You'll be copied on the email. That's why it's good that it's a week in advance that we can get this organized. Okay. Okay. Questions about PowerPoint, questions about final, questions about next week. Anything? Yes. Go ahead, Isaiah.
All right. So I just want to clarify, we're just doing, when we do the PowerPoint, we don't need to have a poster board or anything like that, just a PowerPoint.
Correct. No poster board. It's a PowerPoint presentation instead of the poster board. So you're going to see, and I think it was Arlene. Did she leave us? Arlene? Oh no, she's still there. Arlene, you were the one who did the PowerPoint information. Do you want to just take a minute and just tell everybody like what the process is?
Like about the whole slides?
About the, you know, what's in week 15? Tell everybody what's in week 15 that you have to do.
Oh, there's a video of, I don't know her name, but she's explaining everything that has to go on the PowerPoint. I believe
Crystal.
it's I believe it's just 10 minutes long. And she's just explaining how to how like to bullet point, like to not put big paragraphs. It's easier for bullet points because you speaking over the PowerPoint is going to be like mainly your grade. The PowerPoint is just to guide you. And she's just explaining what goes on each slide about videos, clips, about visuals, and how to make your text stand out.
Perfect. Thank you,
Thank you.
Arlene.
Thank you.
So that's what she's saying is you're not really being graded on the PowerPoint per se. You're being graded on the information, but it has to be visually stimulating, and that's why you're not reading off of slides. Okay. Any other questions about PowerPoint or final? Okay. So you can always chime in and send me emails and whatnot, and we could do it at the end too. But so we did week 13, and week 13 was all about the mental disorders, right? And so you guys did a great job of doing your discussion boards, which I think we had more of more people completed it this time because it was kind of more fun. Though some were like obvious, we all know that Eeyore is depressed, but then there were ones that really took it into play about, really looking into a character. So today's assignment actually plays off of last week's assignment because this is therapy and treatment. So you get a diagnosis for the disorder, and then you need therapy and treatment for that disorder. So your assignment today is to take that character that you did last week and actually make their treatment, decide what kind of treatment they want. But we'll talk about that at the end. Let's just get into a little bit of learning on the therapies. So we all know that years ago, in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, that anybody who was considered, mentally ill at the time didn't have that diagnosis. They were possessed. They were part of the devil. They were demons. They were witches. They were burned at stakes. All of that stuff was all about bad spirits when people didn't act the way they would be, quote unquote, normal. What's normal, right? So they started trying to excise these demons from people's body. That was the first type of therapy or treatment. So they did exorcisms to hopefully get rid of the demons that were making people mental. And they burned witches at the stake because their soul couldn't be saved. Or they sometimes put a hole in people's head. It was called trephining, where they drilled a hole in people's head to let the demon spirits out. And people who, had big holes in their head basically died. So they considered it a success because the demons were let out, but they died because they had a big hole in their head. So was it successful? Hard to say. So once they stopped doing invasive procedures like trephining in people's heads, they still had people with mental health, and they still felt that they had demons and stuff like that. So they locked them away. Does anybody know what the word that starts with an A, where they locked away people? They went to a insane A word.
Asylum.
What? Say again?
Asylum.
Asylum. So the term asylum is the word that is associated with when people had mental health and they got locked away. We use today the word you would hear more prevalent would be institution. That's kind of the nicer word. But back then, when they knew they couldn't help people, they put them in what was known as an asylum. And if you heard that word asylum, you knew it had to do with mental health. It 100% was the term insane asylum. That's where it comes from, because everybody in the asylum was theoretically insane. So the majority of the time that people were in asylums, they did not get any treatment. They just got locked away so that they weren't a burden on society. There was no treatment at all. When they decided to work on some kinds of treatments, they didn't really know what to do. So they used really, kind of harsh electroshock therapies. And, not for nothing, but electroshock therapy does work, and it's still used today, but under very different circumstances. So we'll get to the electroshock therapy that is good and is used, but this was kind of like really bad electroshock therapy. So it wasn't until 1963 when JFK signed funding into the government to actually help people. So prior to 1963, there was no help for people with any sort of mental disorder. And JFK in 1963 decided to sign in funding to actually help people instead of just lock them away. And so the majority of adults got help, but children at that time weren't really considered as having mental health concerns. So most children didn't get the help they needed, but the adults did. Now, when we talk about mental health, the majority of people that have mental health complications are in two big places. Our homeless population has a big percentile. About 26% of all homeless have some sort of mental health concern. And in our justice system, criminals and convicts, they're actually, if you think about it, they break the laws and they hurt people because their mind isn't working correctly to tell them not to do that. So them carrying out this deviant behavior is due to a mental health concern. There is something that went wrong in their thinking that caused them to perform whatever act got them into jail. So a really good percentile of the mentally ill are in our justice system. So when we talk about help, you talk about it in two terms. You talk about involuntary and you talk about voluntary. What's the difference between involuntary help and voluntary help? It's pretty obvious, but what is it?
Involuntary is not your choice.
Right. So if we have a relative that is very, let's think of a schizophrenic, and they're hearing voices and they have this paranoia and their behavior is so off the wall and it disrupts your life, you've heard the term have them committed. When you have them committed, that is involuntary. So that is, they're not going to a mental health facility by their choice. Courts may mandate mental health facilities because you've done some really deviant behavior and they consider you to have a mental health concern and you go into treatment against your will. For the majority of people, they go to therapy or treatment voluntarily. There was an act passed in 2008, which was interesting about therapy, and it was called the Parity Act. And they felt that I guess for years, people that had mental health treatment were being charged astronomical rates and they weren't getting access the same way. And the Parity Act of 2008 said, you have to treat patients equally, whether it's a medical problem or a mental problem. So long gone were the days of these super copays and stuff like that. If you pay $15 for a medical copay, you're paying $15 for a mental health copay. So the word parity means to be even. It's got to be the same. So that in 2008, that's when things really became even between medical diagnosis and mental health diagnosis. So let's talk about these therapies. So we are talking about psychotherapy in this chapter. You guys know it's a psychological treatment, and there are methods to overcome personal problems and increase growth. That's what psychotherapy does. So you usually go to some form of therapy because you have a hurdle, a complication, a behavior, a thought process. And so the therapy, which is psychotherapy, is a treatment to help you. That's what psychotherapy is. Now, when we talk about Freud was the first guy who talked about therapy. And Freud used what was known as psychoanalysis. I think we talked about him in chapter 1, because his is a very specific type of therapy. Now, you can go for psychoanalysis today, but you literally will have to look up psychoanalysis, because psychoanalysis is purely about repressed memories and childhood trauma. So the majority of therapists do not do psychoanalysis. If you feel that you have hurdles because of your parents and repressed childhood trauma, you would need to seek out a psychoanalyst. So psychoanalysis, when we talk about Freud, he did things like dream therapy. So you would tell him what kind of dreams you had, dream analysis. Now we all know you don't remember your dreams, right? We remember our thoughts. So you're basically telling him your thoughts that happened when you were dreaming or sleeping, and he interprets it. Dream analysis. Now, Freud, everything was about sex. Everything. So he's gonna talk about sexual stuff if you go for psychoanalysis. He also used, has anybody heard of free association? What do you think free association is as part of psychoanalysis? What do you think you do?
Is say whatever on your mind.
Yes. So I would say a word to you, Amy. I would say, I don't know, ice cream. And you would have to tell me the first thing that came to your mind with ice cream. And based
Chocolate.
on, what'd you say? Chocolate?
Chocolate.
So he might interpret that in some sexual way. I don't know. But that was Freud. He would use whatever word you'd come back, and it's a technique of you saying whatever comes to your mind, no matter how embarrassing or unimportant you think it is, and then he interprets it as part of psychoanalysis. As I said, there's still a population that buys into psychoanalysis, but that's not what the majority of people use today. But no matter what treatment you have or you go to or you seek out, it has to have 3 important pieces for success. The treatment has to be appropriate. If you are suffering from, let's just say, let's pick one, schizophrenia, then electroconvulsive therapy would not be helpful for that. Okay. So the treatment has to be appropriate. Or if you were given a drug that is an antidepressant, that might not be great for your OCD. Okay, so the treatment has to be appropriate. The therapist has to have an expertise in that. That's the second part. So the treatment has to be appropriate, and the person that you go to, the therapist, needs to understand your disability and be able to treat it. There are therapists that have specialties in all different things. Your psychoanalyst is probably not going to be fabulous for your OCD. Okay. And the third part is you, as the attendee or the client, has to be invested in it. You have to believe it's going to work. If you walk in with a bad attitude, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's probably not going to work. So the three parts is the treatment needs to be appropriate. You have to, that the therapist has to have the expertise, and the client has to be invested in it. That's what we, have to use today. So there are a bunch of different therapies. The first, I told you about psychoanalysis is the first type of therapy. Your next therapy is called play therapy, which is used with children. And play therapy uses dolls and stuffed animals and coloring because it relaxes their inhibition, and they have a tendency to be able to talk about trauma that they might have experienced if it's not really them. If they're a doll and they're showing, what happens when they go to, Uncle Steve's house, they might be able to talk about some like sexual type of stuff that they would never be able to verbalize if they were talking about it themselves. Often, I know you've seen it on CSIs and SUVs where SVUs where they have children draw pictures, and the children draw like, a big X through Uncle Steve, or they color him all black because he's a bad person. That's play therapy, where you're able to break through with children when when there's no inhibition. So play therapy is your second type of therapy. Your third type of therapy is a behavior therapy. Behavior therapy is based on what we learned with classical and operant conditioning. Remember, going back to like chapter 3, we learned about classical and operant conditioning. Who remembers who taught us about classical conditioning and what experiment he used? Who's the most common for classical conditioning? Who remembers classical conditioning?
Maslow.
It was Pavlov, and what did he do?
He had the dog thing, where like he rang the bell.
Yep. So he trained a dog to salivate to a bell, which is not in a normal behavior at all. So when we talk about classical conditioning, we talk about training the behavior. So behavior therapy is sometimes what we call counter conditioning, which means we want to change the behavior. We want it to be the opposite behavior. So something like drinking, where we want people to change the behavior of drinking, we might use counter conditioning. We might try to get them to think differently about drinking so they stop drinking. There are drugs that you can take, and it's an aversion therapy. I'm sure you guys have heard of this. So you can take a pill that looks like a vitamin every day, this specific drug, and it's called Antabuse. You take it like a vitamin, but alcohol interacts with it in your body. So if you go drinking, you're gonna get super sick. Okay. And so the concept is that you're counter conditioning. You are using aversion to get somebody to stop drink, because the first time you get sick, you're going to remember it. And then the second time you get sick, you're going to be like, I don't want this to happen again. And after the third time, you're basically going to stop drinking so that you don't feel this absolutely horrible. Take my word, it's bad. So that's kind of an aversion therapy. That's clinical, that's classical conditioning. We also might help you over a phobia with behavior therapy. We're going to help you desensitize. We're going to counter condition how you feel about spiders or flying in airplanes. That's a classical conditioning. We're going to change your behavior. Okay. Who remembers what operant conditioning is? Who remembers who taught us about operant conditioning and what his experiment was? Come on. I know Nicholas knows it, but he doesn't want to be the only one to answer. Somebody answer. What is operant conditioning? All right, Nicholas, just tell us. You know.
That was the one with the rat, right? The test with the rat, and
Yep.
it was Skinner, right?
Yep, it was
Okay.
Skinner and it was a rat. I knew you knew. You just were giving somebody else a chance to answer. I know you. So yes, operant conditioning was rewards and punishment. We learned it from Skinner, who taught the rat to press a bar to get a piece of food. And actually that was reward. And then he used an electric shock to get the rat to stop pressing the bar, which was punishment. So when we talk about behavior therapy, we actually are talking about reward and punishment. We're changing some sort of behavior. So, who knows what ABA is? And it's used with children with autism most of the time. Does anybody know what ABA is? No? Applied behavior analysis. So basically with autistic children, you figure out what is a motivator for them and you actually help change their behaviors by using rewards. Now that works the same way in our juvenile justice system. They work on a token economy. They just reward good behavior. I wouldn't say they ignore bad behavior, but they found that by using positive reinforcement over negative reinforcement works much better in the juvenile justice system. So they work on a token economy, and a token economy means every time you do something you're supposed to do, you get a token. And those tokens then get put into, you can use them in a canteen or you can use them for outings, and you can use those points or tokens for things that you want to build up. So the concept is that positively reinforcing behavior changes behavior, and that's behavior therapy. The next type of therapy is cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy is the therapy that is used the most today. It is how thoughts lead. The therapist will look into how your thoughts lead to your distress, and because how you think leads to how you feel, and how you think leads to how you behave. So it's all about cognition. Cognition is thinking. So cognitive therapy is to correct illogical thoughts. Now, these are the only way to know the thoughts are if you express them. So in cognitive therapy, you are, and the majority of cognitive therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy. The most prevalent is CBT. That's the term that you're going to hear with therapy. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because we're not just changing how you think, we're changing how you behave. As I said, how you think about things is how you end up behaving. So it's like think, feel, behave. So cognitive behavioral therapy is how we're working on your behavior. We use in cognitive behavioral therapy, and again, this is the most prevalent, is what's called an ABC model. So the A stands for action. It's an ABC model. Action, behavior, belief and consequence. It uses an ABC model. Your action, your belief, and your consequence. That's part of cognitive behavioral therapy. All three parts are important. Your next type of therapy is called humanistic therapy. Now, each of these are very different in what they do, because as we know, psychoanalysis is very different than cognitive behavioral therapy. Humanistic is different than all of these. Humanistics are very client-centered. They are not therapist-centered. So a therapist is not going to give their opinions about anything. All they're going to do is restate what I heard you say was. Is that correct? That's like humanistic. So when you literally think about somebody talking to a therapist and a therapist sitting there and taking notes and not really interacting, that's somewhat humanistic. They're not going to give you homework. They're not going to tell you to work on stuff. They're just going to restate things that you have said so that you hear it from a different perspective. So it's all about active listening and about empathy. So it's not about advice. Oh my gosh, that sounds like that was really hard for you. Like that might be what you heard in a humanistic therapy. So they're not giving you any sort of advice. They're just restating what you're going through and having you work through it. That's humanistic therapy. And the last one is mindfulness, which is very prevalent now. Mindfulness, especially since the pandemic, is about awareness of your own thoughts, your own sensations, your own environment. It's all about acceptance. So people are meditating and doing yoga and doing things for themselves is actually mindfulness therapy. Getting in touch with yourself. During this pandemic, mindfulness is humongous. And during this pandemic, web-based apps are huge. People are not sitting across from people in an office without masks. People are using web-based apps for all of these types of therapies. So this is the 2020 edition of therapies because of the pandemic. Now, a lot of therapies use drugs. Now, when we use drugs, it is called biomedical therapy. Biomedical therapy, or another word for that, is pharmacotherapy. I'll spell that one for you. Can you see that? Pharmacotherapy or biomedical therapy. It involves medication or some sort of medical procedure to treat a psychological disorder. Now, which do you think is more effective? psychotherapy or biomedical therapy? In general, what do you think? All right, let's do this.
It depend how compromised, right? Because psycho works.
Let's do a say yes. If you think psychotherapy is more effective, say me.
Me.
Nobody, huh? Say me if you think biomedical therapy is more effective.
Me.
Me.
You'd be right. 80% effective. Biomedical therapy is 80% effective. That does not mean that psychotherapy is not effective. It's that it's hard to measure. It's really hard to measure. When you're talking about a biomedical therapy, it is much easier to measure how effective it's being. For psychotherapy, it often takes longer. It's hard to judge. So going back to those 1600s, and we talked about, drilling the hole in the head. Another term for that took it one step after they drilled the holes in the head, then they actually took out parts of the brain. You've heard the term lobotomy before. That's when they literally took out the frontal lobe where they thought that the mental illness was, and you had a lobotomy. You never functioned in society again. Lobotomies were not effective. It wasn't until medication came on the time, and any sort of medication that deals with mental illness is considered a psychotropic medication. That's the overarching word for biomedical drugs is psychotropic meds. But you take certain drugs for certain illnesses. And remember, you're not cured when you take these drugs. You are treating symptoms. It's very important to remember that. You do not cure schizophrenia or depression or OCD. You're not curing that. You are treating the symptoms, okay? So when you have schizophrenia, you take a medication that helps with the symptoms. So you take an antipsychotic med. So when you have schizophrenia, you take an antipsychotic med, which helps with the symptoms of psychosis. When you have schizophrenia, when you have depression, you take an antidepressant, which helps with the symptoms of depression. When you have obsessive compulsive disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, you take an anti-anxiety, which helps with the symptoms of anxiety. When you have bipolar disorder, you take mood stabilizers so that the poles are not as far apart. You're stabilizing closer together for those symptoms. Now, interestingly enough, when you have ADHD, which means you're usually moving a lot and hyper, that's not the correct word today. They use ADD, they use it in all forms, but it's hyperactivity disorder most of the time. Believe it or not, stimulants cause the symptoms to come down. So it's kind of weird to give caffeine to a hyperactive child, but it actually helps. It's a stimulant. So it's almost like what we talked about, that counter conditioning in a way. Believe it or not, stimulants help hyperactive children. So that one's kind of an interesting one. So I said to you that I would talk about the electroconvulsive therapy. So this is a biomedical therapy. So years and years ago, they used convulsive therapy to electroconvulsive therapy to just shock people, and they became incapacitated. We, to this day, still use electroconvulsive therapy, okay? But it's very controlled. It is still shocking your brain and paralyzing your brain. But the part of the brain that's affected the most is the memory. So if you have, and I happen to know somebody who's done this, if you have major depressive disorder and you have tried every type of therapy and every type of biomedical or pharmacological therapy, you might be a candidate for electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. And what they do for electroconvulsive therapy is they do zap your brain, and your brain is affected and partially paralyzed, and the chemistry is changed. But the point is that you don't remember the reasons for being depressed. So you are not depressed anymore. When you have ECT, you come out of this because you don't really have a good memory. You don't remember the bad things. So you can come out all refreshed. But here's the thing. We talked about neurogenesis, right? And that how your brain regenerates. So electroconvulsive therapy is not a one-shot deal. You will, especially if you go back to the environment, you will start remembering things slowly but surely. All of those things will start coming back, and more likely than not, you will be back to that depressive state after a while. Like we're talking like a year. But again, we're talking about treating symptoms. We said there's no cures for these. They're all treating symptoms. So electroconvulsive therapy does treat the symptoms of depression. You don't remember why you were depressed. So does it work? Yes, it does. It's a biomedical therapy. Now, I've given you psychotherapy and I've given you biomedical therapy. The majority of people do what? Do what? Both. Most people go to a therapist and have some sort of medical. Remember, who prescribes medication?
Psychiatry.
A psychiatrist. A psychiatrist prescribes medication. The psychiatrist is a medical doctor that can prescribe medication. So does a psychiatrist do therapy? Okay, so who here thinks a psychiatrist does medication? Say yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
How many people think a psychiatrist does therapy? Say yes.
Yes.
No, they don't. Psychiatrists do not do therapies. They prescribe medication, but they are not therapists. So you have to go to a psychotherapy, a psychologist, or a social worker or clinical licensed therapist for your therapies. So your psychiatrist makes the medication, the prescription for the medication, and then you do therapy. So it is considered eclectic therapy. It's combining aspects. Eclectic therapy is what the majority of people do, where you have biomedical and you have psychotherapy involved. So let's talk a little bit about these therapies. So the majority of people go to individual therapy. Individual therapy is one-on-one, right? one client, one therapist working on what you need to do. There's also group therapy. And that's where there's several clients that participate at one time and they have a common issue. So we never really want a group therapy to go over 10 people. It's usually between 5 to 10 people for group therapy. And as I said, they usually have a common issue. Now there's a couple different schools of thought on group therapy, and that's that there's always that person that's not going to really participate, but and there's always going to be a dominant. There's always a dominant in a group therapy. I do support groups once a month with my helpline, and there's always somebody you got to kind of squash and say, you're kind of monopolizing. I'd like to hear from other people. There's always a dominant. But those people that choose to hang back, very similarly to this class, you could think about the whole psychodynamic of this class. There's some people that answer and there's some people that never answer. But my hope is that you're all learning. That's the goal. So the same with therapy, even though they might not be active participants, they are learning things. They just choose not to participate. So you also have couples therapy, and that is to work on strategies in a relationship. You have family therapy. Family therapy is you're working on growth as an individual and as a family as a whole. So you have to be able to deal with complications within the family, but you also have to be growing independently in family therapy. No matter what therapy that you're going to, you're going to go through an intake when you first start it, which is going to be an assessment of your needs. They're all going to do an intake. There's going to be confidentiality. You can be assured that nothing you have expressed will ever go outside the four walls of that room. Unless what? When is a time when a therapist might have to break confidentiality?
When you are in danger or you put somebody in danger, then they have to say whatever you
Not even that. I mean, I have to tell you, our suicide helpline at Rutgers, we don't necessarily break confidentiality. When somebody has suicidal ideations, we can send out the police to do a well check. By not really breaking confidentiality, you can ask for a well check for basically anybody. Like there's nothing that supersedes a well check. So you're not really breaking confidentiality with that one. But there is a circumstance where they have to break confidentiality. What would it be?
Permitted by law.
Yep. So if they are disposed for a lawsuit, they will have to break their confidentiality. Now, some won't do it, but it's at the extent of the law. But if you are disposed in a lawsuit and you raise your hands and say, I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you have to tell the truth.
Pastor, I have a question.
Yes.
Let's say, for example, your husband have a depression, and he goes in there, but since you are the emergency contact, why did the hospital did not contact the wife?
So emergency contact, very similar. You don't know this yet because your kids are too young. But once somebody is 18 years of age, they will not share anything because of confidentiality. So if my daughter went to college and was put in the hospital, they're not letting me know. I will never know unless one of her roommates tell me. This college will never, because she's 18 years of age, will never, ever express. So it doesn't matter about emergency contact. Emergency contact is going to be if they need for you to provide the health information because they were in a car accident and they can't give their insurance information. Like, that's what an emergency contact is for. They will never ever call you and tell you about something that is going on, and there's your Parity Act, medical or mental. It doesn't matter. Your Parity Act says it doesn't matter. They will never ever share any information because of confidentiality. So
Your spouse?
even if it's a
Your spouse.
you have to sign a waiver. The only way
But
that
how would you know you have an accident?
Say again?
And he's in the hospital, so you have to wait when they contact you, the police, or you have to file a missing report for that?
You will find out some way. Now, the police are pretty good about stuff like that. That's why you guys know you should have an emergency contact in your cell phone, because the cops, it's part of their training. It's part of their training for them to look for your emergency contact in your phone. And if you have an emergency contact in your phone, more likely than not, they'll call from your phone and say, hey, you're the emergency contact for this phone. I just want you to know that this person was in a car accident, because the hospital is not calling you. Unless your husband, who has been in a car accident or has been entered because of depression, has signed that piece of paper that says Amy Garcia is allowed to know my personal information, you're not knowing nothing. It's part of that Parity Act. So a waiver has to be signed. So when I found out about this with my daughter going for college, I was able to sign this waiver at the college that would allow me to talk to them about finance. Even though I was paying for college, they wouldn't tell me anything about finance because she's 18. So you sign a waiver to talk about finance. You sign a waiver that you can call about information. They're not going to call you if she got sent to the hospital. But you can call them and say, I haven't heard from my child. Is she okay? So the best piece of advice I was ever given is make sure that your child's roommate has your cell phone number, because in case of anything, your child's roommate knows more that is going on than you'll ever get from college, from anybody. So that was the best piece of advice because of confidentiality. It is ironclad. Ironclad. Your next part of therapy is going to be after you've done your intake and you're assured of confidentiality, you're going to find out the treatment plan. There's going to be a treatment plan, which is the objectives of going to therapy. And again, we're talking about biomedical and psychotherapy. There are going to be objectives, and those objectives are measurable. They're measurable objectives. You want to, they're not going to say we're curing you of depression, but let's just say that before you go on, you guys know that especially depression medication takes a while to get in your body. You're not going to feel any benefits for 30 days. Okay. So if you're doing a treatment of psychotherapy and biomedical pharmacological, then your goal might be that in 2 weeks' time, you feel better 2 out of 7 days. And once you've reached that goal, then it might be 3 out of 7 days where you don't have major depressive disorder. You get out of bed. They're just tiny little steps. You get out of bed and you take a shower, or you actually communicate with somebody. These are all things when you're depressed that you don't do, or you might not eat, or you might overeat. So you're changing that behavior. You might eat a square meal a day. They're small and they're attainable objectives. And then the big piece of therapy is to take into effect cultural competencies. Now, this is really important to talk about cultural competencies because in certain minorities, in certain areas, in certain socioeconomic places, there's a lot of stigma. The Latino community is very strong about not acknowledging mental health disorders. Like, it's brushed under the rug. They don't go for therapies. There's discussions about that all the time, that they don't get treated for mental health disorders the same as other nationalities, because in Latino communities, they don't recognize mental health. So we look at cultural competencies, we look at barriers. If people don't have money for copays, if people don't have money, they're sure not spending it on a therapist. Because if they don't have insurance, you know it can be expensive. So you have to look at, you know, socioeconomic status. You have to look at stigma. You have to look at access. If you live in an inner city, there might not be the same access to a therapist. If you live in a cushy area where everybody has this nice little shingle hanging for psychotherapy, it's really easy to get therapy. But if you live in the inner city where there's not a lot of therapists, or you live in the rural, let's talk about rural countries. You know, you're living in farmland. It's hard. You might have to drive an hour and a half to get to a therapist. So those are all barriers that we talk about when we talk about therapy. So I am going to share my screen, and we're going to go to this week's module to talk about what you're going to do today. All right, let's go to week 14. And you're going to do your study plan for therapy and treatment. You're going to take the quiz, but let's talk about your assignment because it builds on last week's assignment. So it says for step 1, review your previous discussion assignment about the fictional character who was diagnosed with a psych disorder. Consider the diagnosis and the disorder and describe 3 different treatment methods from your reading that could be used to treat the disorder. Give details about the method and what your recommendation for the best treatment or therapy and why. So you have to write 200 to 400 words describing 3 treatment methods for that character that you wrote about last week. Does anybody have any questions? Do the lockdown browser quiz from last week, please. I can't tell you enough how important it is for you to get that done. I put it in week 13. It's also in week 15. There's a video about the final exam tutorial. Then you click on over here and take it. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. Questions? Okay, so I will get on next Tuesday. If you have questions or anything to do, I will come on here on Tuesday next week. But theoretically, this is our last class. So I was thrilled you all got on. This class was amazing. It was something like we've never experienced before. Welcome to virtual learning. It's very crazy, but it was a pleasure having you. I loved reading your stuff. And your grades will be posted shortly after the 16th. And it was my pleasure. I don't know what else to say. Normally, I would have a party. We'd be having a party with reviewing over our final if we were in class, but there's no party because it's a pandemic. So I just thank you for being part of the class. So everybody have a great end of semester and end of final. I know you'll rock it. Just study. Do your PowerPoint presentations. I'll give you feedback on that. And this teaching you was my pleasure.
Thank
I
you
was
very
glad to have you
much.
as my teacher.
Professor.
Bye.
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 So weird.
Oh. Professor, I will try again. If no, I'm gonna see if I print it out and then I bring it to see him. I don't know if she's still in college because I saw her once.
No. I don't go to the college, so it would.
No, I know,
still
but
have-
I feel like if she can scan her and try to send it to
Okay.
you.
Okay. All right, that would be fine.
I'm gonna check if she's there because I don't know, like, because everything went up again.
Right.
So I
I
don't
mean,
know.
we're not on the campus. I
Yeah,
don't think people are on the campus.
but I saw her last month.
Okay. I mean,
Thank you. God bless. Huh?
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Donald, did you need something?
Okay.
No. All right, I'm ending. Bye.